The mid-15th century in England was a period of simmering discontent and political instability. The nation had not yet recovered from the long and costly 100 Years' War with France. King Henry VI of the House of Lancaster sat upon a precarious throne. He was a pious and gentle man, but ill-suited for the brutal politics of the age. His reign was marred by his recurring bouts of mental illness, leaving a dangerous power vacuum. During these episodes, his ambitious and formidable queen, Margaret of Anjou, governed in his stead. The nobility was factious, with powerful lords commanding their own private armies. Chief among the king's rivals was Richard, Duke of York, a man who believed he had a stronger claim to the crown. York's claim stemmed from his descent from the second and fourth sons of Edward III, arguably superior to Henry's descent from the third son. Tensions escalated as York was appointed protector of the realm during one of Henry's mental breakdowns. He used this power to sideline his rivals, particularly the Duke of Somerset, a favorite of the Queen. When King Henry recovered in 1455, he reversed York's decisions, restoring Somerset to power. Fearing for his safety and feeling his influence destroyed, Richard of York gathered his allies and marched on London. The simmering tensions finally boiled over into open warfare. The First Battle of St. Albans was fought on May 22nd, 1455. It was a relatively small affair, but politically momentous. The Yorkists, led by Richard of York and his ally Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, won a decisive victory. The Duke of Somerset was killed, and King Henry VI was captured. York once again became protector, but his authority was short-lived. Queen Margaret, fiercely protective of her son's birthright, would not accept this defeat. She gathered a new army in the north of England, rallying support for the Lancastrian cause. An uneasy peace held for 4 years, punctuated by failed attempts at reconciliation. The conflict reignited with the Battle of Blore Heath in 1459, a Yorkist victory. However, the Yorkist momentum was shattered at the rout of Ludford Bridge, where their army deserted. Richard of York and his sons were forced to flee into exile. The following year, the Earl of Warwick, the Kingmaker, returned from Calais with an army. He defeated the Lancastrians at the Battle of Northampton and captured King Henry VI once more. Richard of York returned to London and formally laid his claim to the throne before Parliament. A compromise was reached, the Act of Accord, which named York as Henry's heir, disinheriting Henry's own son. Queen Margaret was outraged and refused to accept her son's disinheritance. She led her formidable army south to confront York. The two sides met at the Battle of Wakefield on December 30th, 1460. Richard of York, rashly leaving the safety of his castle, was killed in the fighting. His son, Edmund, Earl of Rutland, was also captured and killed. In a final act of mockery, the Lancastrians placed a paper crown on Richard's severed head and displayed it over the gates of York. The Yorkist cause seemed lost, but it was immediately taken up by Richard's eldest son, Edward, Earl of March. Edward was a charismatic and brilliant military commander, a stark contrast to the frail Henry VI. He intercepted a Lancastrian army at Mortimer's Cross, inspired by a vision of 3 suns in the sky. Edward won a crushing victory, bolstering his army's morale. Meanwhile, Queen Margaret's army marched south, defeating Warwick at the Second Battle of St. Albans and freeing her husband, King Henry. However, her army's reputation for pillaging caused the city of London to bar its gates against them. Edward and Warwick seized the opportunity, entering London to a hero's welcome. There, the handsome and popular Edward was proclaimed King Edward IV. But to secure his crown, he had to destroy the Lancastrian host. The decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Towton on Palm Sunday, 1461. Fought in a blinding snowstorm, it was the largest and bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. Edward IV led from the front, fighting for hours and inspiring his men. Henry VI, Margaret of Anjou, and their son fled to Scotland. Edward IV's reign began with a period of relative peace and prosperity. He was a popular king, known for his charm and accessibility. However, he made a critical political error in 1464. While Warwick was negotiating a prestigious French marriage for the king, Edward secretly married a commoner, Elizabeth Woodville. Elizabeth was a widow with 2 sons, and her family was large, ambitious, and Lancastrian-leaning. The marriage and the subsequent rise of the Woodville family infuriated the Earl of Warwick. Warwick, the kingmaker, felt his influence over the king he had created slipping away. He began to plot against Edward IV, forming an alliance with the king's own jealous brother, George, Duke of Clarence. In 1469, Warwick launched a rebellion, defeating a royalist army at Edgecote Moor, captured Edward IV, briefly holding the king prisoner. However, Warwick found that the country would not accept his rule, and he was forced to release Edward. After a failed second rebellion, Warwick and Clarence fled to France. There, in an astonishing turn of events, Warwick was reconciled with his old enemy, Margaret of Anjou. They forged an alliance to restore Henry VI to the throne. The alliance was sealed by the marriage of Warwick's daughter, Anne Neville, to Henry and Margaret's son, Prince Edward. In late 1470, Warwick invaded England, forcing Edward IV, who was caught by surprise, to flee to Burgundy. The kingmaker had struck again, restoring the bewildered Henry VI to the throne in an event known as the Redemption. Henry's second reign was to be even shorter than his first. Edward IV, with support from his brother-in-law, the Duke of Burgundy, landed back in England in March 1471. He outmaneuvered his enemies, gathering support as he marched south. The Duke of Clarence, seeing the tide turn, betrayed Warwick and rejoined his brother, Edward II. The decisive battle was fought at Barnet on Easter Sunday, April 14th, 1471. In the dense fog, Lancastrian forces mistook their own allies for the enemy and attacked each other. The Earl of Warwick, the mighty kingmaker, was killed while trying to flee the field. On the very same day, Margaret of Anjou and her son, Prince Edward, finally landed in England. Her cause was now hopeless, but she pressed on to one final confrontation. The final battle of this phase of the war was fought at Tewkesbury on May 4th, 1471. The Lancastrian army was annihilated. Young Lancastrian heir, Prince Edward, was killed, either in battle or executed shortly after. Queen Margaret was captured and imprisoned. On Edward IV's return to London, King Henry VI died in the Tower of London, almost certainly murdered on Edward's orders. With the death of Henry VI and his son, the direct line of the House of Lancaster was extinguished. Edward I now ruled unopposed for 12 years. This second reign was a period of stability and economic recovery. However, the king's own family remained a source of tension. His brother, George, Duke of Clarence, continued to plot and cause trouble. In 1478, Edward finally lost patience and had Clarence arrested for treason. Clarence was executed in the Tower of London, reputedly by being drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine. Edward III died suddenly in 1483, leaving behind 2 young sons. His eldest son was proclaimed King Edward V, but he was only 12 years old. The late king's brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was named Lord Protector of the realm. Richard was a loyal and capable administrator during his brother's reign, but he was also deeply ambitious. He swiftly moved to seize control, intercepting the young king on his way to London. He arrested the Queen's family, the Woodvilles, accusing them of plotting against him. Richard housed Edward V and his younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, in the Tower of London, ostensibly for their protection. Then, Richard began a campaign to declare his brother's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville invalid. He claimed Edward IV had a prior marriage contract, making his children illegitimate. With the princes declared illegitimate, the throne was offered to Richard. He accepted and was crowned. The 2 young princes in the Tower were never seen again. Their fate remains one of history's most enduring mysteries, but it is widely believed they were murdered on Richard's orders. Richard III's usurpation and the presumed murder of his nephews horrified the nobility. A rebellion broke out, led by the Duke of Buckingham, Richard's former ally, but it was quickly crushed. Disaffected Yorkists and remaining Lancastrians now looked for a new champion. They found one in Henry Tudor, a nobleman living in exile in France. Henry's claim to the throne was weak, derived through his mother from a legitimized but barred line of Gaunt and Gaunt. However, he was the best available Lancastrian candidate. He pledged to marry Elizabeth of York, Edward I's eldest daughter, to unite the warring houses. In August 1485, Henry Tudor landed in Wales with a small army of English exiles and French mercenaries. He marched into England, gathering support along the way. King Richard III, a skilled commander, assembled his royal army to meet the challenger. The 2 armies met near Market Bosworth on August 22, 1485. The Battle of Bosworth Field would be the final, decisive battle of the Wars of the Roses. During the battle, several of Richard's key nobles, led by the Stanley family, betrayed him. Seeing Henry Tudor's banner, Richard made a desperate, final charge to strike down his rival personally. He was unhorsed and surrounded, fighting bravely to the last. King Richard III was killed, the last English king to die in battle. Henry Tudor was acclaimed king on the battlefield, becoming Henry II. He fulfilled his promise and married Elizabeth of York in 1486. This union symbolically merged the White Rose of York and the Red Rose of Lancaster into the new Tudor Rose. The reign of Henry VII was challenged by several Yorkist pretenders, such as Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck. However, Henry VII successfully suppressed these threats, consolidating his power. His reign brought an end to the decades of civil war and established the powerful Tudor dynasty. The Wars of the Roses had decimated the old nobility of England. It paved the way for a stronger, more centralized monarchy under the Tudors. The bloody conflict left deep scars on the English psyche for generations. The tale of ambition, betrayal, and bloodshed became a cornerstone of English history and literature. The struggle between Lancaster and York served as a grim lesson on the dangers of a disputed succession. The memory of the wars would influence English politics for centuries to come. The White Rose of York, though defeated, was never entirely forgotten. The Red Rose of Lancaster, through the Tudors, had ultimately won the throne. Conflict reshaped the landscape of English power and society forever.